It has been a long time since I've hosted these live streams, and today is a very special one because we're talking about the difference between colorism versus featurism versus hairism and texturism, and we're going to be talking about which one might be worse or which one would be harder to break free from. If you don't know me, I'm Dr. Sarah Webb, the founder of Colorism Healing. And if you are watching live, be sure to type in the chat if you have questions. I will make time for questions at the end, or just leave a comment. I know a lot of you already have opinions that you've expressed on social media about this very topic. And so we'll definitely highlight some of those here. But also, if you just want to say hello and let me know where you're tuning in from, because I always like to know where folks are watching from. And the sort of run of the show for today, I'll definitely give you some context as to why I'm asking this question. And then I want to share some definitions to make sure we're all using the same vocabulary, right? So we have the definitions for colorism, featurism, texturism, and hairism. I also don't like to assume that people already know what those things are. And then I'll share my original perspective. So I had been thinking about this question for years, and I already had my own opinion on what it would be, on what my opinion was. So I'll share that, and then I'll talk about the poll results. So I even took screenshots of some of the polls that I took. I'll discuss those, and then I'll revisit my perspective. Has it changed since reading the poll results? If not, why or why not? And then we'll open it up to questions and answers. All right, so let me get into this chat. I see some folks joining already. Hi, Richa Singh, welcome. You are from India, yay. I always love it. I always have at least one international person joining my live streams. I used to do weekly live streams on Instagram, but I am moving over to YouTube and LinkedIn for monthly live streams now. So this is the kickoff live stream for that. All right, so let's talk more about the definitions. I want to get started with that. Hi, Shiloh, watching from Philly, PA. Welcome. We have a LinkedIn user from Atlanta. Oh, y'all coming in deep. Okay, from Brazil. Hey, Bruno. Nice to see you. Yay. So glad that you all could join me. And I love that we have folks from all over the world. We have Brenda from London. Look at y'all. This is so cool. In fact, it's mostly international folks so far that have typed in the chat. So let's get into some of the definitions of what colorism, texturism, featurism, hairism, and texturism really are. And if you have questions, definitely add those towards the end, but I'll start off by just running through the information that I have. So the very first definition I want to talk about is colorism. You know, I founded Colorism Healing, so that's obviously a huge focus for me. And so I define colorism as privileging lighter skin tones and marginalizing darker skin tones, or discriminating against darker skin tones. And I use the two words privilege and marginalization in the definition, because a lot of times we focus on the negative things that happen to darker skinned people, but colorism is also part of the other side of that spectrum, where there's a greater value placed on having lighter skin tones, right? And so when we talk about things like colorism and texturism, we also have to acknowledge that with the discrimination, there's also aspects of privilege along with that. Now, after colorism, thinking about skin tone, we have the phrase featurism. And so featurism is also about having relative privilege or marginalization based on your facial features. And I say these features are those that are associated with specific races. So we know that people of different races can have a variety of facial features, but in certain cultures, we associate certain eye colors with certain races. We associate the size and shape of a nose, of a person's nose, with being a certain race. And so I call them racialized features. And so the most common ones are the nose. The size and shape of a person's nose can be a source of bias. And eye color, as well as eye shape, and then the size and shape of a person's lips. So those are some of the common facial features that might add to or mitigate the bias that someone has towards us. All right, so the next one is texturism. So I have been going back and forth between the phrases texturism and hairism. And so I want to clarify why I think those two are closely related, but I don't think they're exactly the same thing. So when we talk about texturism, we're talking about having privilege or being marginalized because of the unique texture of your hair. And so how curly is your hair? How straight is your hair? How wavy is your hair? How thick and bushy is your hair? Or how straight and thin is your hair, right? And so the difference between texturism and hairism, I think hairism is more inclusive of the kind of discrimination we can face. So hairism includes discrimination or privilege based on texture, but it also includes or makes room for discrimination based on the hairstyle. So this is what things like the Crown Act that has been passed in a few places in the United States, where it's illegal now to discriminate against people because of how they wear their hair. So hairism can be a form of discrimination regardless of the texture of your hair. So a common one that we see stories and see in the news is people being discriminated against for wearing braids, right? Or for wearing locks or for wearing cornrows in their hair. And even the hair texture that I have, right? It's not the same as the hairstyle that I use for my hair texture. And so that's why I have a slight distinction between hairism and texturism. So today I'm choosing to wear my wash and go afro. I just washed it today and I let it air dry, right? So that's a particular hairstyle. But sometimes I do double strand twists, right? And so that even though my hair texture is always the same, sometimes my hairstyle is different. And I must say that afro hairstyles, afro textured hair, but particularly if you wear it as an afro, tends to be the more stigmatized hairstyle in our culture, right? And so welcome, come on in the room. If you're just joining, I have just defined our key terms for this conversation. We're talking about colorism versus featurism versus hairism and texturism. And we're also going to get into which of these might be the most impactful or which of these might be the hardest to overcome. Let's see if we have others joining. Yes. This topic, Risha Singh says this topic is very close to my heart. Absolutely. It's very close to mine as well. That's why I've been doing this work for as long as I have. And what sustained me is having that heart-centered, heart-driven aspect of the mission. Hey, everyone from, hey, Salita, nice to see you. I think Salita's in Atlanta too. We have someone from NYC. Welcome, welcome. We have Jessica. Thanks for the great info, the thumbs up. Hey, Lisa says, I appreciate the nuance of texturism versus hairism. Yeah, I think hairism is because people can have straight hair, like, you know, African Americans might have a straighter hair texture, but if they wear it in cornrows, they still might get told by their boss that it's unprofessional, right? And so I think that's important to include, as well as the actual texture that we sometimes get discriminated against. Loving the wash and go fro. Thank you, Brenda. I am definitely going to do a video on like my tips for having a successful wash and go fro. I think one of the biggest ones is making sure your hair is trimmed because that it makes it easier to detangle. So, all right, those were the definitions of these terms. And I want to talk about the question that I asked. So as I mentioned, I've been thinking about the question of which of these is worse, quote unquote, or which of these is the harder to overcome. And when I first asked the question, I was thinking specifically about Black people as a collective, right? But obviously having an international cross-cultural audience, especially, you know, here on LinkedIn, I think the poll was more general. But my initial thinking, before I share you the poll results, my initial thinking before the poll results, and some of you might be surprised, but I would have voted for texturism and hairism as the most difficult thing for Black people collectively to overcome, right? And so I'm focusing on that specific lens before I zoom out to the international, cross-cultural, cross-racial definition of it. But here's why I said texturism and hairism before surveying everyone. One, my thinking was that our hair is the easiest physical attribute to change. It's really quick and it's super easy to change your hairstyle compared to changing my nose, for example, right? The process of getting plastic surgery on my nose is way more invasive than just braiding my hair or throwing on a wig or, getting it braided, right? Also much more costly. And so thinking about even the class barrier of doing plastic surgery on our faces. But even skin bleaching, even though it's widely practiced, the effects of skin bleaching vary widely. The outcome of it is not really reliable. And so I think in terms of these three features, right, the hair versus the skin versus the features, I think the hair is the one thing that is most easily transformed, right? And so it has given people greater access in terms of, assimilating into the workplace. And well, they're going to discriminate against me based on my race or my gender. So if I straighten my hair, that's one less aspect of my identity that might be a cause for discrimination, right? The second reason why I was thinking hair and texturism, hairism and texturism, was that it's the most acceptable thing to change. And so more people are okay with changing our hair than they are with, say, bleaching their skin or getting plastic surgery. And so even though lots of people engage in those practices, there's more of a stigma attached to plastic surgery. There's more of a stigma attached to skin bleaching than there is to getting a relaxer or getting your hair pressed or blown out or wearing extensions, right? It's not as stigmatized as bleaching your skin or getting your facial features. And so people are more likely to engage in transforming their hair as a way to mitigate discrimination or bias. And then the third thing I was thinking about in terms of why I would say texturism and hairism would be the hardest for Black people as a collective to break free from is the lack of positive representation. So I was thinking, my thought process was that I was seeing lots of beautiful dark-skinned people, lots of representation of dark-skinned people, but the vast majority of them still had straight hairstyles, right? They still were wearing hairstyles that were typical or normalized in Western societies and not even Western societies anymore. Really, all societies have normalized straight hair. And that's part of, why I'm also saying this. And I think in particular, the question around Black identity is that our hair has been one of the defining features of what classifies us as Black, especially thinking about the history of race across the globe. And no, race is not directly tied to phenotype, but it has been used as one marker of race, right? So we can't rely on phenotype or physical appearance alone to determine race, but it's definitely intricately interwoven into that. So what happened when I took the poll? And so I must say, it's particularly on Instagram, but also here on LinkedIn and YouTube and things like that. People voted, but also people left comments. And so I'm going to share with you some of the results of that poll. I have to check the chat. In India, colorism is very common. Yes, Richa, it definitely is very common. Salita is confirming that she's an ATL as well. All right, so let's look at some of these poll results. And I pulled from LinkedIn and YouTube specifically because you can actually do polls on those platforms more easily than you can other places. And so on LinkedIn, colorism was voted as the worst thing or the most difficult thing to overcome by 69%. And then in second place, we had featurism at 19%. So that's a huge lead for colorism amongst the people who took the LinkedIn poll. And if you didn't get to take the poll and you want to vote live here in the chat, then let me know which one you think it might be. What's your opinion in terms of which one is worse or not? And so for those who said other, there were 6% of people who said other. And most of the people who voted for other expressed that they think it's the combination of all of those things, right? And so that is very indicative of the YouTube poll that I took. So on YouTube, I posed the question slightly differently. And that's another thing. This is not a scientific survey. I don't think this survey would stand the peer review process because I slightly changed the question a little bit and I altered the options for each social media platform. And so on YouTube, I gave people the option to say all of the above. And that's partly just because you can have more options in the YouTube poll. And so in that case, the majority of people voted for all of the above, right? That has been a huge response. And on Instagram, the comments, I think someone recently, when I was announcing this live stream, said all isms, ALLISMS, all isms. And so on YouTube, we had 57% of the people said all of the above, and only 31% said colorism. So based on the results that we see here, most of the people who are responding and interacting, they either think colorism is the front runner in terms of difficulty across society and overcoming it personally, or we have about as many people saying that it's just all of them together and you really can't parse them out, right? So now I kind of want to talk about, where do I stand after having read all the comments and looking at all the polls. And some of the, Instagram comments in particular were very informative, just because, for example, people who said it's colorism, we talked about how I often use colorism as an umbrella term to include featurism and texturism. So a lot of the folks who said colorism said they chose it because they see it as encompassing hair and facial features, right? And then other people who chose, featurism or texturism just talk about how it's across the globe. Those are things that stand out in terms of, particularly because on Instagram, I asked about Black people specifically. Whereas on other polls like LinkedIn and YouTube, I don't know if in YouTube if I said Black people specifically, but when you add that extra context of race, then some people said hair texture and facial features stand out even more. Because you can have people of different races who have the same skin tone, but hair textures is the one thing that might identify you as being Black or not. And so after looking at all these polls, this is where I currently stand. Drum roll, please. Dun, 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 dun. I still think it's texturism and hairism. Particularly amongst Black people, and having it be the hardest thing for us to overcome within ourselves. And it goes back to the same sort of ideas and rationales that I had in the beginning, where because it is so easy to change, it's less stigmatized as a thing that we can change, and we lack the representation of it, right? And so in thinking about having dark skin, and so for me, for example, I have dark skin, but I also have the natural 4C hair. And so I have both of those things. And there's almost the pressure for being dark skinned to straighten your hair, right? And I hear this from a lot of my other followers and community members, that being dark skinned was already a point of pain or, negative experiences for them. And so they, in order to cope with that, they said having straighter hair sort of mitigated or hedged them from being as marginalized or as stigmatized as they would have otherwise been. And so I think precisely because it is sort of the one thing that has been able to shield a lot of dark-skinned women, they're not necessarily ready or willing to let go of that, right? I also say, y'all already know this, right? My folks who've been around a while already know that this particular conversation and my conversations in general are not about convincing people. So this is very much my opinion. And I think everyone else's votes and opinions are equally valid, right? Because I don't think at the end of the day there is a hard and fast true answer. And I also emphasize the fact that I'm thinking about us as a collective, but where it gets even more nuanced and more complex is when we look at individual circumstances. And so thinking about where I stand now, the question of intersectionality is utmost importance. And so I want to acknowledge all my folks who just said it's all of them. It's everything. It's the intersection of all these things. It's the unique interplay of facial features and racial identity and hair texture and body type and nationality. And I agree with that. I agree that intersectionality, having multiple identities that impact our experiences, is always happening all the time. And so on the screen here, I just have a quick point about that, right? All parts of our identities are always influencing our experiences, but they don't always have equal influence. Depending on situation and context, one part of our identity might stand out over and above the rest, right? And so I think that's a nuance of the nuance because intersectional thinking is it's kind of a nuance because people have not been applying it for very long, especially people who are not don't hold multiple marginalized identities. But even when we're talking about intersectionality, I think a nuance is that even though I might be a Black, African American, cisgendered, heterosexual woman who's able bodied, who has 3 college degrees, a PhD, who's tall and thin, who's from the South, right? All these different things that are impacting my identity. Depending on the context that I'm in, depending on what room I'm in, depending on the situation that I'm in, not all of those identities are really coming to bear on that experience to the same degree. And I'll use the example of going shopping for clothes. Okay, so stay with me because I just went shopping for a new pair of jeans. I'm wearing them today. Can't wait to show them to y'all on Instagram or YouTube Shorts or in a LinkedIn post. But in shopping for jeans, my sexuality, for example, is not as pressing of an issue or is not as at the forefront of my experience the way the size of my body is, right? And so we think about my privilege of being completely comfortable and being able to take it for granted that I can go into any store in that mall and find pants that fit my waist. Now, they might not be long enough. That's often a huge problem. Often the pants are too short, but they at least have my size, my waist size, right? I have never felt anxiety about going shopping for clothes and trying on clothes. And that's a result of body privilege because we live in a culture that privileges people with certain body types, with thin body types, over people with larger body types, right? And so even though I am cisgendered, even though I'm heterosexual, even though I'm dark skinned, even though I'm African American, all those things are very important in my identity. When I was trying on clothes at Zara, it was the size of my body that was most at the forefront of that experience, right? And so we also can think about other situations where if I'm being profiled by the police or racially profiled by the police, then does my socioeconomic status bear as much on that situation as my race and gender identity, right? Because if I'm walking into a store, if I'm walking through the mall, the security guards don't know how much I earn. The security guards don't know how many degrees I have, right? And so in that scenario, if we're talking about being profiled by police officers or security guards, or being followed in a store or kicked out of a store accused for stealing, my educational background, my nationality, even my ethnic identity are less pressing than the fact that I look like a Black woman, right? Especially having my afro out, right? And so, yes, intersectionality means that all of our identity components influence our experiences, but in certain circumstances, in certain situations, there might be one aspect of our identity that is cutting through the noise, right? That is standing out over and above all of those other just as important aspects of our identity. Hopefully y'all were still with me. Let me check the comments to make sure. I need to stop sharing my screen. There we go. Let's see. I got inspired to do a poll for my audience to get their perspective. Good. Yes, definitely. And please tag me. Let me know so I can also see what folks are saying, what they show. Lisa Hurley says, I agree because so many in the Black community will accept a dark-skinned person if they have good hair. Yeah, I think about people like Tatiana Ali. Who are some other big names? even if they don't have good hair, I think about like Naomi Campbell, a lot of the supermodels and things like that, the famous actresses, they are only accepted when their hair is straight, right? Like if Naomi Campbell was going on auditions with an afro, um, would she have been recognized or noticed? Um, Brenda Lee says, yes, agree to intersectionality definition, spot on context. Yeah. Thank y'all. I'm glad that the intersectionality piece made sense. Not to sidetrack, but 3 degrees. Lisa. Yes. Lisa Hurley, for anyone's watching, has a podcast that she co-hosts with her sister Sharon. It's called the Introvert Sisters Podcast. I definitely recommend checking out. I did an episode with them on colorism and other things, but they also have a podcast where they talk about having 3 degrees. It's a thing. Amazing session, Sarah. Very informative. It's 4 a.m. here and my Wi-Fi is acting up. I will follow up on the recording. Okay, nice to have you, and definitely follow up if you can. We are with you. Okay, good. Are there any questions? So this is my version of unpacking that poll. And I know a lot of people were curious because the reason why I didn't initially share my thinking or my perspective on it is because I didn't want to influence what people would say. I wanted just their pure reactions because even if, most of my audience is not, they definitely are not like just blind followers, but subconsciously, if I were to give my opinion first, it might have swayed some people. So I wanted to just get the unfiltered opinions of everyone and wait till later to really share my opinions. Chili from TLC. Oh, yes, that's a good one, Lisa Hurley. Thank you. All right. So I don't see any other questions coming in. That's really all I have for you all. I will be doing live streams monthly. And I think my next topic is, well, I'll announce my next topic. I don't want to commit to a topic on this live stream. But let me know if you have other questions in the comments. So even if you don't want to post them live or if you didn't watch the live, let me know in the comments under the LinkedIn or YouTube video if you have additional comments. And I will see you all in the LinkedIn, YouTube streets. Take care. Bye.